All right, bunch of stuff to talk about here today on the Morning Pit, the Wednesday edition. I think that's what day it is. Yeah, that means we have our live show tonight. That's exciting. 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Jim and I will be hanging out and talking to you about Pitt sports. We'll talk about the Central Michigan game. We'll talk about the West Virginia game. We'll talk about everything that's going on in the world of Pitt sports, so make sure you tune in for that because we would like to have your comments and questions as part of the conversation. For now, we got a bunch of different topics to hit on, at least 4 that I have kind of in mind. Some news that came out yesterday, something that's been really, really good for Pitt through the first 2 games, where or what has become of a few guys who left Pitt over the offseason, and then one big thing that Pitt really needs, and I think they could be on the verge of getting. We'll see. But it's something they really need as they go forward because they kind of haven't gotten it yet so far this season, but it's a really big deal. So lots of different topics, lots of different things to talk about and think about. Hopefully at least a few of them interest you here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wednesday here on the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com hanging out with you. There was some news yesterday that you probably saw, and I don't know how much news like this resonates. It wasn't about an injury or a transfer or anything personnel related, player personnel related. It wasn't really anything to do with this week's game. It's not about Jaheim White being out for the season or anything like that. It's sort of not really inside baseball type of news, but I mean administrative type of news, back room type of news. But relevant news all the same. And the news is basically that Alliance 412 is shutting down. That was Pitt's NIL collective. I use was because it's a past tense because they are closed, apparently at Pitt's behest. Pitt made the announcement that Alliance 412 is concluding its operations effective, I think maybe the end of the month or something like that. And Pitt, the university, the athletic department will be now streamlining all of the various fundraising efforts related to NIL and anything else going on. It'll all go through the athletic department. I wondered for a long time what would become of these collectives. The collectives were born out of the early transfer portal and NIL period. I mean, you go back to 2021, 2022. That's where these collectives really came from, where all of a sudden, there were unlimited transfers. And the transfer portal that allowed for contact between potential transfers and potential coaches. And then sort of concurrently, you had the advent of the name, image, likeness rules or lifting of restrictions where student athletes could make money, and you had those two things sort of happen together, and there were no rules, and there was no regulation, there was no guidance on what to do. All you really knew was that the schools couldn't do the NIL payments themselves. And so these collectives were born as third-party entities that could handle that. And they were sort of a necessary byproduct. They're a necessary, element that had to happen in order to facilitate this stuff. That, it was basically a, kind of funneling almost of donate to the collective and we'll get the money to the student athletes. And these were set up around the country. It was like everybody saw that NIL was an opportunity to entice transfers, to entice players to stay on your roster, and somebody needed to operate that. And it couldn't be, at least officially, it couldn't be the school, it couldn't be the coaches or anyone like that. It had to be a separate, unaffiliated third party, at least, formally unaffiliated third party. And so the collectives grew out of that, and they were a necessary piece of the operation from the start. But as we moved into it for a couple of years, I always wondered, what's going to be the lasting, are these things going to last? What's the long-term prospect for these collectives? And I went back and forth. I think I remember even talking at the beginning of the summer about how I thought collectives would still have a place, that they would still be important. But I always wondered about it. And when we got to this summer, in the wake of the post-house settlement where schools could now share revenue with student athletes and pay the student athletes directly, I really wondered, what's going to happen to these collectives? And there was a part of me that thought, okay, you now have revenue sharing. You have this cap, this $20.5 million cap that everybody can do. And so there's something of a level playing field there. But that just brings everyone to the same level, which is what they were at before. And then everyone was sort of on the same level before. And what separated schools, schools who were able to go out and make the biggest impact in the transfer portal and hold on to their best players, was that NIL money that was sort of above and beyond, that above the cap money. And so I felt like, well, that above the cap money is still going to exist. It's still going to be needed. And so maybe these collectives will still have a place. But I think what we've seen, and Pitt is not the first school to do this, and I suspect they won't be the last, is the schools taking it all under one roof. And there's a number of reasons for that, why the schools would want to have it under one roof. The first thing, and I think this might have been the most relevant point for Pitt, as I look at it and just talking to different people, is that Pitt's number one priority right now, the top goal, is to hit that salary cap, hit that revenue sharing number. Even if they don't get to the full 20.5, getting to a point where they can make sure the football program and the men's basketball program have resources to be competitive. So if sort of the industry standard seems to be settling around 70-75% of the cap going to football, roughly 16 million, 15 million, 16 million, whatever it might be, you need to make sure you can get to that. And that's Pitt's top priority right now, is making sure the top programs get what they need out of the revenue sharing cap. And that's more important than anything else for Pitt's athletic department. And so I think if you're Alan Green, if you're Pitt's athletic department, you're sitting back and you're looking at it and saying, okay, we've got to somehow come up with $16 million for football and a few million more for men's basketball, and then a little bit here and there. Let's just say we're trying to get $20 million. Okay. Because that's what the cap is, right? So you're Alan Green, you're sitting back and saying, we need to get to $20 million. We know the university is ultimately probably going to help us on this, but we need to raise as much of this as we possibly can. So we're trying to get donations. Last year they started the Athletic Directors Fund that you could donate to, and it was sort of a discretionary fund, sort of said without saying that it's going to go to the revenue sharing and try to offset that cost and help build up the money that will be distributed. They're doing all these things to try to bring in money, but then there's this other thing, this third-party entity that's out there also trying to raise money, presumably competing for the same dollar for something approaching the same purpose, right? Where the collective is out there trying to raise money to generate these NIL deals, and Pitt is over here trying to raise money to pay the revenue sharing. And Pitt prioritizes the revenue sharing. It says we have to hit that first. That's the thing we've got to get done. And so all the money that's getting donated should go to that. And so they effectively fold the collective, shutter the collective. That's my take on it. That's my read on it. I do think that since Pitt started the Athletic Directors Fund and the fact that it allowed for tax-deductible donations, which donations to Alliance 412 are not tax deductible, I think a lot of the money that had been donated to Alliance 412 was largely shifting to Pitt in the Athletic Directors Fund already. I think people want those tax deductions, and so they still felt like the money was going to the student athletes, still trying to support the efforts of being, building competitive programs, and so they went that direction to begin with. Or some of that money was already shifting. Some of those donations were already shifting. So I think Alliance 412 is running into some of that in terms of just the money they were bringing in. Now, all the donations will go to Pitt, and I think Pitt's going to handle shifting people over from their Alliance 412, deals and donations and subscriptions, whatever you want, membership. Pitt's going to handle shifting all of that over. I think when it comes down to it, I always try and remember this quote. I don't know why I think about it often, but the John Wayne movie, The Searchers, one of John Wayne's last real Western movies, where he plays an aging cowboy who's past his prime, one last job type of thing. I read a quote about that movie, or a review about that movie, that said, the Searchers, John Wayne is basically the kind of character who was necessary in order to settle the West, and then had to be removed in order for the West to move forward. And I wonder if that's kind of what the collectives ultimately will be remembered as. That the first few years of this NIL transfer portal era, the Wild West, as it's been called sort of appropriately, they were necessary. They were necessary in order to sort of harness this thing and channel it into some sort of system. Now the system's been built, and now maybe they need to get out of the way to allow the schools to take it over themselves. Rightfully or wrongfully, it sort of feels like that's what it is. That, in order to kind of establish a system in this Wild West, you needed these entities to kind of create what the environment looks like and the framework of it all. And now they have to move out of the way. Or at least in the opinion of these schools, a lot of these collectives have to move out of the way. Some of the schools are keeping their collectives because they know they're still going to need NIL money to compete. They're still going to need NIL money to get those top-end transfers and get more than just what the revenue sharing is going to allow. And I think, but I think eventually you'll get to a point where that can be done in-house as well. As far as facilitating sponsorships and brand partnerships and things like that, which, now with NIL Go and all of that, you've got to be a little bit more above board than you were in the past with the third-party collectives. So I don't have a 40. If we had a 40, we'd pour some out for Alliance 412. I guess they have till the end of the month, so maybe we'll get an opportunity to pour out a 40 for I don't drink 40s anymore. What am I talking about? I can't drink malt liquor. But we would pour one out for Alliance 412. On to the next one, I guess. Let's see. A couple other things that I wanted to hit on here. That was the big news that came out yesterday, and I felt like we needed to talk about it. One thing that's been a giant weapon for Pitt this season, and I've talked about it at different points. Oh, there's a dog barking in the background. Sorry. They do that sometimes. Pitt has been remarkable. Like, I think we've probably talked about this week, but I don't think we can stress it enough how good Pitt's special teams have been through the first two games. The return units, the kicking game, the punting game, the cover, it has been really, really sharp. And, some of that is the level of competition you're playing against, but it's not like everybody in the country is returning punts and kicks long distances when they play against FCS and Group of 5 opponents. I think you have to have something kind of cooking. And right now, Pitt has it cooking. Kenny Johnson has returned 4 kickoffs this season. His returns have gained 78, 25, 12, and 47 yards. That's 162 yards on 4 kickoffs. That's 40.5 yards per kick return. Think about that. You are getting to midfield or beyond on average every time Kenny Johnson returns a kick. 78-yard kick, that was well beyond midfield. 25 got them close to midfield. 12 didn't, but 47, the 47-yard kickoff return, we've talked about this a bunch of times against Central Michigan. After Central Michigan cut the lead to 1 touchdown, Kenny Johnson returns a kickoff 47 yards, basically, and then 2 plays later, they score a touchdown to go back up by 2 scores and put the game out of reach. That was huge. That was one of the turning points in the game, one of the most important plays in the game. Monster weapon right there with Kenny Johnson returning kicks. On the punt returns, Desmond Reed has returned 5 punt returns for 105 yards, so he's averaging more than 5 yards per return on punts, which is a crazy number. He obviously had the 88-yard touchdown, which is, that's going to skew the stats, but he also had a 20-yard punt return against Central Michigan. And then Kenny Johnson had a really good day returning 3 punts against Duquesne. He returned 27, 36, and 1, so that adds up to 64 yards. If you put it all together, Pitt has gotten 331 yards on 12 returns, punt and kick combined. That's just a remarkable number to me. When you're close to 30 yards on returns per return, and I know I've spent a lot of time this week talking about averages, not really wanting to focus on averages, but that's you're really getting something going there. And whether that's the scheme, whether it's the ability, I think it's a combination of both. And the best thing is you are now a real threat in the punt and kick return games. If teams now have to decide, are they going to kick to you and take the chance of Kenny Johnson returning one a long distance or Desmond Reed going back a long distance, or are they going to try and kick away from you? Either way, you win, because either you get the ball in Reed and Johnson's hands and they have a chance to make a play, or the opponent kicks away from you, and that's going to work out to your benefit for field position as well. If they punt it out of bounds, if they kick off out of bounds or kick it short, or the squib kick or something like that, or just kick the a touchback every time. They're giving you some field position, by trying to avoid having you break the big one. Like Pat Narduzzi was like, well, we need more explosives. They had I think he said they didn't have enough explosives in the Central Michigan game. I guess to be fair, the Duquesne game, they had an 88-yard punt return and a 78-yard kick return. But in the Central Michigan game, they still had a 47-yard kick return and they had a 20-yard punt return. So they got some explosives out of those return units, and it's been a huge strength so far. It's been remarkable. Couple updates on guys who transferred out of Pitt. Just a quick look at guys who left this past offseason, how they've been doing. Some better than others. I'm not going to go through every guy, but Ty Diefenbach out at Cal Poly, maybe the best that we've seen, or the best so far this year. He started both games for Cal Poly, the quarterback. He's 1-1, completed 66.7% of his passes for 345 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. He's also Cal Poly's leading rusher with 62 yards and a touchdown. Pretty good stuff there. Chief Borders, defensive end, transferred from Nebraska to Pitt, played 1 year at Pitt, and then transferred to UNLV. He started every game for UNLV so far. He's got 3 tackles. All of them were behind the line of scrimmage. He's also got 9 pressures in 3 games, which might be more than he had at Pitt last year. Nikai Johnson is playing defensive tackle at Tulsa. He's started both games. He's got 3 pressures. Sincere Edwards went down to UCF. He's not starting a defensive end for Central Florida, but he does have 7 tackles and 3.5 tackles for loss through 2 games. And David Ojebwe, the transfer from Clemson, who really didn't play hardly at all for Pitt last year. He went to Norfolk State. Started 1 out of their 2 games. He's played almost 100 snaps. He's got 4 pressures, 9 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and both of those, that 2.5 were all sacks. So pretty good stuff from him. Dejon Reynolds is at UNLV. He's caught 3 passes for 53 yards and a touchdown. Seems like a good decision by him. Rodney Hammond, 15 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown through 2 games. He started both games, but not a lot happening there. Jordan Bass went to Virginia Tech. He moved to safety. And Montravius Lloyd went to Bethune-Cookman and moved to linebacker. He was a running back at Pitt, so some position changes there. But largely, there's not a lot. Outside of what I just ran down, you haven't really seen much in terms of production from the Pitt transfers who left. I mean, some guys, Nate Yarnell hasn't played any snaps yet. Noah Bigelow, Jeremiah Anglin, Terrence Moore, Andy Jean, Adham Abaraya, Maurice Schmorenzer haven't played at all since they transferred. Rylan Gandy has played 3 snaps on defense for Indiana, leaving a starting job at corner at Pitt, although he might not have been in the starting lineup this year. Leaves a starting job, and he's played 3 snaps through Indiana's first couple of games, not in a starting role. All right, the last thing, one big thing that Pitt needs, and maybe we'll talk about this tomorrow, one big thing that kind of hasn't happened for Pitt this season that they need the big breakout game from Desmond Reed. Desmond Reed has had 147 all-purpose yards, I think, in the Duquesne game, 141 in the Central Michigan game, or maybe it's vice versa, but he's right around that level, 288 all-purpose yards through 2 games. He hasn't really had that huge game yet. He had 66 rushing yards against Duquesne, 46 against Central Michigan. He caught 1 pass against Duquesne. He caught 5 for 69 against Central Michigan. So, better production there, and obviously he has the big punt return. Last year, he had He went for 200-plus all-purpose yards in each of the first 2 games. He had 234 against Kent State, 254 against Cincinnati. He had 210. He only had 76 all-purpose yards against West Virginia. But after the Youngstown State game, they went to North Carolina. He had 210 all-purpose yards there. He went for 191 against Toledo. He went for 174 against Clemson and 151 against Virginia. Those 6 games, all more than what he's gotten so far this year. Now, maybe they're limiting his touches. Maybe they're trying to be smart about it, not overwork him, and I'm totally on board with that. But I think, it's going to happen that you're going to get that 200-yard game out of Desmond Reed, that 200 all-purpose yard game out of Desmond Reed. And it's just a matter of when it's just a question of when it comes. It very well could be on Saturday in Morgantown. But that's the one big thing that Pitt is missing so far, that they just haven't gotten, is that big breakout game from Desmond Reed. And I don't think it's necessarily on Reed. I think it's just kind of the way the games have played out. But between the returns, the rushing, and the receiving, he's going to have those big games. I mean, I predicted him to have 2,000 all-purpose yards. He is not on pace for that right now. He needs to average like 153 or something over the course of 13 games to get there. If he only plays 12 games, he needs to average like 166. Right now, he's averaging 144. So he's got to make up some ground to get to that 2,000 all-purpose yard bar that I set for him to reach. It could happen this week. Could be one of those big all-purpose games, maybe 200-yard game for Desmond Reed in Morgantown on Saturday. But that's the one thing that we can talk about this, we can talk about that with Pitt's offense, but you need that Desmond Reed breakout game, and it's going to come, and it's going to happen multiple times this year. He'll have multiple 200-yard games. It's just, when is that first one coming? Could it be this Saturday? I don't think Pitt would complain. I think they would be more than happy to have that 200-yard game from him this Saturday. All right, don't forget, we have the live show tonight at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Looking forward to that. You can join me and Jim for the conversation. We always enjoy getting down and talking a little Pitt sports with you right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you check out the website Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe, and we will catch up with you tonight for the live show. We'll see you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.